Hello and welcome to Power and Purpose with me, Mann, Maro, Itoje, and Will Troost-Ekong. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about performing under pressure, something we all know about, and we have a lot to share on. So let's get straight into it, guys. I mean, Will, you've got a lovely bed behind you, and I know that's not your bedroom. Not that I've been sneaking around your house to have a little look. But where are you, man? What's going on?
I want to say this right. So I'm in Polokwane in South Africa. It's a city about 3 hours away from Joburg, and this is not my bedroom. I don't know why you should know that, Leon, but we'll kind of leave that out. But no, with all seriousness, I'm here on a trip with the Super Eagles. It's our final window of the World Cup qualifiers for the 2026 World Cup in America. It's been a really tough ride, actually, for the last 3 years. We've been under pressure really from about the fifth game on because we didn't get too many results at the beginning of the qualification, and now we found ourselves with a unique opportunity to still qualify for the World Cup with 2 games left, one against Lesotho in our group, and the final game which is away here in South Africa, and the final game against Benin in Nigeria. So it's all up for grabs. To give kind of a context to the group, South Africa have 14 points. Benin are leading with 14 points. We've got 11 points, and Lesotho also has 11 points. So between these next 2 fixtures, anything can still change. We're playing Benin in the final day, and of course South Africa have 2 difficult games with Rwanda and Zimbabwe. So we're in it to win it, and this is really the moment, which is the money time of the business. So we like you said, I think perfect description of what this moment is, and having to perform under pressure and everything that goes with it.
So, Will, from my experience, pressure does some weird things to people. Sometimes it brings the best out of them. Sometimes it makes them melt. And I guess as captain, as the leader of the team, you have a massive role in trying to make sure that this pressure brings the best out of your teammates. Has there been anything that you've gone about or thought about in trying to make that happen?
It's something that I think about constantly, to be honest, even when I'm not with this team. You know how demanding Nigerians are. So I get reminded every day of the importance of having to qualify for this World Cup. And also some of that responsibility, or a big chunk of that, feels like it rests on my shoulders. So there's something that I do think about a lot, and trying to see how we have to approach it. I feel like every case and every game is slightly different because, as you will know in sports, some of the games there doesn't need to be a lot of talking about or any extra motivation, because you can feel the occasion and you kind of have to maybe absorb that, and then maybe actually try to bring the levels down of what people might feel like tension-wise, and even for myself. Because like you said, I think pressure can do really strange things, and you feel like all of a sudden that you can't perform on the same stage, or something that you haven't done for maybe 30 years now, and you just know how much can be at stake. So for this particular moment, I feel like it wasn't the right thing to really make a big thing of it, because all of the players would have been reminded constantly of what these games mean and the opportunity that we still have at hand. My whole take for this camp specifically was that I wanted everyone to enjoy it and have a certain level of togetherness, because I know that's what brings the best out of this team. So that's kind of been my understanding of the players that we have here. Also, most of them, they are playing on the world stage week in, week out. So there will be no sense of intimidation of crowds or opponents, or maybe conditions. It's just more about managing ourselves and really trying to set a stage for us to be able to perform. And I think that starts with understanding that none of us is going to do this by themselves, and that we're all going to have to contribute together. And that has to be with a certain harmony. And I think that is really what my focus has been now for this particular game against Lesotho.
So you've alluded to it in your response, but you would have seen and experienced the magnificent feeling and praise during the AFCON, when unfortunately Nigeria fell short at the final, but the road to the final was amazing. It captured the imagination of Nigerians in Nigeria, and I guess I would say Africans in the diaspora as well. But equally so for the Nigerian football team, when things aren't going too well, there's a harsh level of criticism. Could you just talk a little bit about how Nigerian criticism may differ from Western criticism or British criticism? Because I do think there's a different type of heat to the response.
It's been sprinkled with a good amount of pepper. So yeah, in Nigeria, I think the beauty of our nation is that people are also very direct. It can be great when things go well. They'll praise you beyond the heavens, and you would have to talk to yourself to kind of calm yourself down. But yeah, a lot of other times it can be the other way around, and it can sometimes feel really personal and invasive, maybe also because there is such a big presence, whether that be on social media or if you live in London, you meet so many Nigerian people too, for example, so it's a constant reminder. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest part of it, is that people also expect so much, and I think there's so much more than football that is tied to this World Cup tournament, particularly because there's a sense of pride and joy that people get from Nigeria being at the World Cup, uplifts the whole nation, together with a certain expectation of Nigeria being the biggest economy in Africa, automatically that we have to be there. And if there's anything that Nigerians don't like, is shame and embarrassment. So for them, that would feel as much as it would be for us as players. So my experience has been from both sides. So in 2018, we qualified against all expectations because we were in the group of death at the time with Algeria, Cameroon and Zambia. And we ended up qualifying. And then we had the 2022 Qatar World Cup. We won our group, but in this format, we had a playoff against Ghana. So everything came down to winning a group and playing against another group winner. And you can understand the dynamic already between Ghana and Nigeria for that World Cup play. So we went away to play in Ghana first. We drew 0-0. And then at home, we played draw again, 1-1. But they qualified for the World Cup on an away goal. So that felt like complete... it was one of the most difficult moments in my career, having to overcome that. So I know what both sides of this coin feels like. And this particular qualification has kind of made us feel both sides of that already. I think maybe early on, we were very confident that we would qualify, seeing our group. And the other teams that were in there weren't necessarily the other major teams in Africa, so to speak, that we normally talk about. But then throughout the progression of these last 2.5 years or 3 years almost of qualifications, when it does look like you are not going to qualify, which it really looked like until most recently when South Africa got a 3-point deduction, you get overwhelmed with that feeling of shame, embarrassment and disappointment in yourself, but also for the team and most of all for all Nigerians.
I'm really interested in the perspective of the media, because the media amplify messaging, feeling within a country. So this is a question for both of you, really. But we'll start with you, Will, because I'm fascinated by Nigeria and want to learn more about Nigeria. But the role of the media, I mean, do they amp up the pressure? Do you as athletes, as players, notice that? Because I guess when I was actively in the media week in, week out, sometimes you think, I'm just putting a piece out here, I'm not even sure anyone's going to see it or read it. And you don't know the impact of your work. But it'd be really interesting to understand from your perspective how much that does impact the players, how much they see on social media, and what that can bring to the table for you to deal with as a captain.
It's something that is very much a presence in our team, and something that is spoken about because there's quite a lot of access to the team, whether that is from personal relationships between players and media, or also just them being very familiar with everyone, and sometimes being allowed to be in our hotel or visit training sessions. So to an extent where it's almost like they're fighting over headlines and everyone wants to put something out, even if something isn't necessarily news. Something needs to happen at all times, right? So I think there's also something that has changed in this generation, is that all of us have a phone. All of us are happy to share what we are doing during the training camp, whether that be on different social media platforms. But yeah, for example, if I know one of our team, my mates or myself, share something which could be a interaction, which I wouldn't think anything of that will be analysed to the final second. And if there can be a headline coming out of that, then that, so be it. So to give an example of that, that's more recent. Yesterday, I had a video of the boys playing table tennis. It happened to be Victor Osimhen and our second goalkeeper, something that didn't even cross my mind. But since that video, I've been bombarded by Galatasaray media. I've seen that everywhere on social media, and there's been two takes on that. So one of them is, okay, the team seems to be really bonding and having some downtime together instead of everyone being on their phone, which was also a big issue around the team at some points because they saw pictures of the players listening to music before training, before the match. But then the other side of it is like, these guys are not serious about this World Cup qualifier and they're just there to have fun in the hotel. So it can be really difficult because it kind of wants to make you be really closed off. But I also feel like we have a obligation to the media for them to be able to share, and especially to the Nigerian media, because they don't often get the same access to us players as the rest of the European media does. And that's something that I hear quite often from journalists as well. So sometimes they say, oh, why don't you guys grant us those interviews with Sky Sports or whatever, that go into more detail, or maybe take them behind the scenes. And when you guys are in Nigeria, you're more closed off. So we tried our best to help them in a certain sense, because I also know that this is their living. And then the other part, which is also an interesting dynamic, is that not only are we playing for ourselves to be at a tournament and want to make our family proud and the whole nation, the media is also dying for us to qualify, because that for them will be a huge rise in whether it will be sponsorships, trips, and experience at a tournament. So we get constantly reminded of that as well. So sometimes I'll have an interview, and as soon as we come off air, I'll be like, Skippo, you have to qualify these boys for the World Cup. You need to talk to them because I need to go to the World Cup and this is my chance. We missed out on Qatar and this is the kind of sponsorship deal. And they'll be really direct with me because that's also a Nigerian way. But yeah, that is something that people wouldn't necessarily know about. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and I think they add so much to us as well. But it's always like a fine line, and I feel like you kind of need to know how to maneuver that. And sometimes that is my responsibility as captain as well, to say to the boys, okay, this is a moment where we kind of have to be closed off, just because it will turn into a distraction, or if things don't play out exactly how we want them all to play out, this will be the first thing that people will say. So it's an interesting take, and that's kind of my experience, and I'd love to know what that's like in England, Maro, and what that's like with a rugby team, and if you kind of feel that same pressure from the media, other than just the headlines and maybe the common perception of what the British people would feel about your performance.
So the media is massive. The media is massive. They shape narratives. Sometimes the narratives can be helpful. Sometimes when you have your back against the wall and, they think you're going to lose. I remember playing Ireland a few years ago, and they were coming to Twickenham, and it was as if they were writing our obituary. They were going to come, they were going to kill us, really. And we ended up winning the game, but the whole narrative leading up to the game acted as fuel, and we fed off that and we lent into it. But it can quite equally drip into your mind and make you believe what they say is true. And often what they say isn't true. But if you believe it, then it becomes true. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this affects young players as well as old. So the goal is to understand what is important and understand how you can navigate the media, because especially in a sport like rugby is always looking to grow. The media play a role in the sport growing, so they are necessary. But at the same time, you can't allow it to dictate how you feel. There's a rapper, I can't remember who, but it went along the lines of something like this: if you live for the cheers, you'll die for the booze. And that's the story, because if you follow media narratives, you're up, then you're down, you're up and you're down. I've been playing professional rugby now for 13 years, and at times I'm Superman. At times I should have retired, and I've been everything in the middle. So you just can't live by it. So they're necessary, but you have to have skills and have the capabilities to not allow it to infiltrate your mind.
So what do you do
Do you know?
specifically, Maro, to deal with that? So if you go back to what you did maybe at the start of your career to what you did on the most recent Lions tour, is there something that you do very different? Do you read all the stuff that comes out? Do you keep a tab on the media? Do you give a certain access? How do you navigate that now compared to how you might have done that at the start?
So when I was younger, I probably most definitely would have read a lot more than I do now. And sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, I don't read anything," and "Oh, I don't listen to what they say." And I have periods where don't. I take myself off social media, particularly around big tournaments. So when in the Lions tours, World Cups, Six Nations, I often go off social media and try and interact as little as possible in and around newspapers, media, etc. However, even if you don't read anything, you know the narratives that are out there. So I don't think it's fully accurate to say that you you can totally block it out. I think you can block a lot of it out, but I don't think you can totally block it out. And in terms of what I do, I think the big thing for me is the understanding of it, is the understanding that don't have a unique knowledge on the game. Whilst there may be some truth in it, it's more likely that the analysts, the players that you play with, the coaches that you're engaged with, whether that is your current coaching staff or perhaps coaches that you have a relationship with outside of the club or country, or the international coaches. Between them, you can get a pretty good steer of what you need to do. Then you just can't take it in. You just try as much as possible not to take it personally, and you try as much as possible to know for yourself what is right, what is wrong, and just be humble enough to go down and do whatever you need to do.
This is fascinating for me because I'm obviously the other side of this, or have been, in terms of the person asking questions during a pressurized time for teams, for individuals. And what I don't think we think about is the journalist is under pressure, because we have to get new information. Because when we go to our boss, what did they say? Right, okay. And if you can't get any interesting new information, then the digging gets deeper to find something. So something has to go across the back page of the newspaper. Something has to be part of the broadcast. Something has to be part of this space, because otherwise it's an empty space. And I think where I've seen people seriously under pressure, they've just gone into different territories that they probably wouldn't normally go into to try and find something. Now, I'm not kind of justifying that and saying that's right, but I think sometimes we think of the media, and I speak as the SJA, sports journalist, vice chair. So I kind of have a real spectrum of different journalists that I'm speaking to. And like what we said earlier, like everyone wants their nation to do really well and get to a World Cup so they can go to the World Cup and so that they can increase their profile by doing bigger pieces, etc. But equally, what did they say? If they said nothing of interest and gave nothing to you to put a story together, then normally other journalists start looking around to find things that will fill that hole. So it's a really interesting dynamic in terms of like everybody in that situation being under pressure.
So, Leon, often as players, we feel that the journalists misrepresent us. They write stories about us that aren't true. And so I guess my question to you if for whatever reason there isn't a story or there isn't a compelling story, at what point does it become unethical to skirt around or make a story out of nothing, or fabricate the details of a story just to sell a story and make your editors happy, where that probably isn't strictly true?
Well, look, it's completely unethical if it's not true. That's the rules of journalism. Is like, the information has to be true and correct. I was a feature interviewer, so I wouldn't necessarily be doing the hard sports news. I worked in sports news, but at the BBC, where you have to have a certain amount of sources to be able to run the story. So other places, they don't need that many sources to run something. And if it's not true, they can kind of get away with it sometimes, because in sport, people don't tend to sue. Like in the other part of the newspaper with the celebrities, they sue. So it's a different kind of game in that kind of space from my experience. However, where people find things that are unhelpful for the team to be out there can still be true, right? There could have been the left back in football has smacked the right back in training, and there's a big bust up in the camp, and no one wants anyone to know about this ahead of a major sporting event, but it's happened, right? So it's truth. It's not untrue. It's just unhelpful for it to be out there. But there's nothing ethically wrong about putting that out there, because it's the truth. It's just unhelpful, but it's the truth, right? And it's a bloody good story normally if it's something like that. And that can cause all sorts of divisions, etc. within the camp. It can cause all sorts of turbulence. But at that point, a journalist, is it truth and fact? Can I report it in that way? That's fair game. I'm not saying I agree with that in terms of how I would feel about it. But if you're paid, if your job is to get information, your job is not to be a cheerleader for Nigeria or for England Rugby or for the Lions. That's not your job. You're not to be a cheerleader. You're there to report facts. So if that has happened and nothing else is going on that day, or forget even nothing's going on that day, that's a great story, right? So someone's going to put that out there. How do you guys feel about that?
I think I don't 100% agree with Maro about the misrepresentation, because I think there is some parts of that where if there is no real clarity from the person about maybe what is being misrepresented, you kind of leave that room for interpretation, right? Because I feel I've seen so many times with players, whether it be myself or different superstars that I've been lucky to rub shoulders with or be on the same team with, is that when something goes unaddressed for a long period of time, it kind of gains a life of its own, to an extent where you can see how that can have a pressure on a player or on a manager or on a system or organization, rather than what you said, if there was something true about a training ground bust up, there might be something that just needs to be explained and clarified on that for that to be dealt with. Because I think for my personal, if we bring it back to the first question about the pressure of the media, is that the times that I have almost addressed something head on that has been very painful for my ego, for example, or for the situation that I'm in, the better I've kind of come out of that and the quicker I've been able to get past that, so it wouldn't feel like it was a continuous cloud hanging over me, right? So I think there's been moments where journalists have helped me as well, in moments where there could be a narrative from maybe the fans in general, and if I talk maybe more specific for Nigeria, because that can be so impactful, good or bad, that journalists have stood up and said, well, actually, that is not the full story, or that's not the truth, and they might ask me then to share my thoughts on that, and that actually helps the situation. But it's also, I think, really important to separate the emotional part from it. If we not talk about the ego part, the emotional part, because if we talk about British journalists and they're looking at you, Maro, because they want to be at the Rugby World Cup or a stage like that, you have to understand that there's also their own emotion attached to whatever they are now writing or talking about. So I think it can be very different when you're talking about national teams, because a lot of the times we are all there trying to achieve the same thing, and it could just be a source of frustration, because like we said, it could be all kinds of contracts or things riding on us qualifying or not qualifying, whereas maybe at a club level that can be slightly different, and then you can say, okay, there are maybe certain people that want to shape a certain narrative because it's more interesting, because they're selling more, because there's nothing that interesting going on really. But I think with the national team, that can be a real source of pressure, especially when things aren't dealt with. And that's kind of been my experience over the last 10 years. And whenever there has been problems or moments where we didn't qualify, or you lose the final, and then you end up speaking about those emotions, and there's like an understanding from people, because we're all human, then that is something that can kind of be passed and then be used as an experience to grow again. And I think that's just kind of my take on that.
So I think two things can be true at the same time. I think players can clearly put their story out there, and it can be clear for the journalists, so they know what the players' feelings are. But there's been times where players have done that, and journalists have moved the needle a little bit on what they say. And sport is, I guess, one area of that. But if we look at the world of politics, I imagine, I'm not a politician, but I imagine what they will say is, the journalists are twisting my words. I didn't say it like that. And, they often pride themselves on being quite clear, or sometimes at least, with what they want to say. But just my final point on this is that, Leon, you spoke about the journalists not being cheerleaders. And I agree, they're not being cheerleaders. Will, you spoke about how a lot of these journalists want the team to do well so they can go to said place. Their newspapers or their publication will then pay for them to go. Then it's more money for them, more money for the newspapers. But I guess when stories run, and perhaps it's, again, twofold, when stories run which are negative about the team, perhaps it's the team's fault for even allowing that to be a story in of itself, or allowing the leak to come out. But that it does produce a feeling of them not really being supportive of the team, because it then feels like, they're not really on our side. They're not really supportive. They don't really want us to do well, because they keep hammering said player about this, or keep hammering the coach about this. So it's I guess it's chicken and egg a little bit. I guess the team should really not put themselves in that position, but sometimes for what people would see as lesser things, that's the outcome.
But their obligation is to tell that story, though, because I think if you want to hold them accountable about telling the truth, then if they do know information which has come out, they have to tell that truth. Because I feel like if you say that, fine, but then if there's a story that you do put out that isn't true, then we will make sure that we also correct you publicly for that part which you haven't done, filled your obligation.
The correction is never as loud as the story. The correction is never as loud as the story.
And I should say, look, there's lots of different types of journalists. There's lots of different types of journalism. I think where I've seen athletes become really unhappy is when there's been comment pieces by someone in the media who's just shared a really strong opinion, and that opinion has been based on their own observations of something, where they've maybe not got the full story, got half of the story from someone who might have an agenda, who's kind of briefed them to give their part of what's happened without the full story. And I think when those things start happening, I can completely understand how that feels deeply personal, because it can be, and how that can become a distraction. And you think, well, hang on, what's going on here? Now the rest of the media are following this comment piece in terms of what the narrative is around the team. That's why I think social media has been huge for athletes, because
it has been groundbreaking.
Many have come out and said, this story is nonsense. This does not happen. And some athletes are very, very good at it. And actually, that's one of the worst things for a journalist, to see your story being shot down immediately by the person at the center of it. Like, so that's a big thing. And, you know, I would say one thing to kind of like develop this in terms of like journalists have feelings as well. And I'm not sure that
we care about yours, Leon. We care about yours.
You care about some of us. Maybe some of us you don't care about for good reason, right? But what I saw when I was at London 2012, right, where there's huge, like, I mean, just the focus on everything around the London Olympics was massive. Like for a sporting event, I was a feature reporter on TV, and I did an interview with a judo guy from Team GB who went out of the Olympics within 20 seconds. He was a senior athlete and went out within 20 seconds from his sport. I think it was judo. And I asked him, is this the end for your career? Like, you know, do you have any regrets? And a lot of people felt that was a very harsh interview. And actually at the time I was just searching for the why. Like, we kind of expected this guy to maybe get a bronze, or, you know, he's been training for the last 4 years for this moment. And within 20 seconds, it's done. And then the complaints that came in about my interview were nuts. Like, the director of sport pulled me aside and said, don't worry, we looked at the interview, there's not going to be any action. I was thinking, action? What? Action? For what? I've just asked the questions. But the guy started crying in the interview, right? And that was difficult for me to deal with. And actually within the interview, I apologized in some ways, or I kind of said, look, you know, he said, I let my family down. I let everyone around me down. This is the worst moment in my life. And I said to him, look, you definitely ain't let them down, because you're here, London 2012, you've just competed, it ain't gone so well, this is sport. But like, we do feel it. But a lot of the other journalists who were, you know, experiencing increased profile jumped off social media. They deleted their accounts because the pressure that they felt at those moments meant they just couldn't deal with it. And I think that's when they got an insight into what you guys have to deal with, because that's your week in, week out. For these journalists at that time, it was that point in time. And other journalists, like, who have a high profile, are getting feedback, shall we say, a lot, and don't know how to deal with it, so just jump off social media. But I think at that point, I gained a greater appreciation for what athletes have to go through in terms of the scrutiny and the pressure that you have to deal with.
Yeah. And I think that story kind of captures the responsibility of journalists. The journalists have such huge power in shaping narratives, shaping stories, and which people take as truth. Even my dad will read a few articles and tell me, oh, Maro, this is this, and he'll say it as if it's the truth. Then I'm like, do you really think that, or is that just something you've read? You're like, yeah, they're saying it in the papers. Yeah. So it just goes to show the responsibility of journalists, reporters, as well as players.
So my last take on the media, which is such an important part now, is that I think the playing field has also really changed from where we are now and the access that we have, and also what we can share with people. So both ways. I've seen the impact which Maro alluded to, and also Leon, about wanting to delete your account and almost like block that away from you, to also seeing from a group setting. The nice things that I've experienced is that when we've had moments with players, myself, but many other players in the last few years, where they've probably been over criticized, or there's been a narrative which isn't actually representing the truth, is that we also have a power as a group to kind of make a standpoint. And I feel like for me, then coming back to my responsibilities, is that is also important to do. And I think when you do address that, it can really kind of set someone free, and then kind of release some of that pressure around them for them to then feel good enough to perform again. Because I feel like if you take it back to how someone feels personally, is that if you have a certain narrative about you, whether you're not scoring goals, whether you've scored an own goal, whether you're not qualifying, all kinds of stuff that can be happening whilst you're playing, you kind of within the team feel like, okay, if the media is saying this, then maybe that's what all my teammates are thinking. And I think when you kind of have that openness within a team and you can have those discussions to say, well, this isn't right, or you can see someone is feeling down about it. In our group that we have here, and the culture that we have in this team now, is that there is a real sense of togetherness, and we will stand up to defend, whether it is your Victor Osimhen, who is, top of everything and is probably expected the most of, to our third choice goalkeeper or player who comes for the first time to the Super Eagles camp, and they might be criticised for something, and we say, well, that's not how we want to do it here. And I think when it's like a togetherness and the group makes a decision like that, there's nothing really that the media then can't accept. And I've also seen it during tournaments where people have really stepped out of line, and then afterwards they haven't been able to get the access again. So I think there's also something about kind of putting that power back, and that only goes for the truth. So it can't be, okay, if we lose the game, that now we say we don't give any media access because we don't like talking about a painful truth. But if something is said which isn't true or is actually harmful for the group because it's trying to, like you say, move the needle a little bit on what's really happening, then it's also within our power to either debunk that or also kind of say, okay, we're going to take that pressure off completely by saying that person no longer has the access because they have a wrong intention, or us as a group don't stand for that anymore. So that is my last 2 cents on media, but that's exactly why I'm in right now. And I think what we've done now, particularly for this World Cup qualification, is that we try to be a little bit more reserved, and just it's been quite nice to be for an away game first, and with not a lot of access or none at all, so we can just really focus on what we need to do, because that's the most beautiful part of it, is that media is always written about things factual of things that have happened in the past. And we are here every day to try and build towards something else and shape the future. And I think if you get too focused on looking at something that's too good or too bad that has already happened, then you will lose the chance to actually create a new narrative. And that's the opportunity that we have now in front of us.
So changing tangent a little bit, Will, Nigeria has a strong history of football. There's been many great players of yesteryear who have represented the Super Eagles and have done extremely well. The likes of Nwankwo Kanu, the likes of JJ Okocha, John Obi Mikel, Taiwo, Joseph Yobo, and to name a few. And they had great success in the jersey, in the green jersey, whether that's the Olympics in the 90s or whether that is various different AFCONs. They have legendary status within Nigeria. Do you feel, as the current generation of players, do you feel the weight of expectation that those players, I guess, have achieved so much, so individually and collectively? Do you feel that is a weight on your current team?
Yeah, it's an aspiration, because we sometimes see those players in flesh. They come and visit the camp. JJ was very present throughout our tournament in Ivory Coast, and I thought it was something that he did amazingly to actually let into his experience, and it really felt like it was an older brother talking to us, and he was standing there in front of us, and we dream of making the same thing happen, right? But it's definitely a big expectation, and I feel that's kind of with a pressure that comes with the green and white jersey, because what's happened before, like you said, and for me personally, my generation now would never be held in that same light if we don't end up having a similar success or outdoing the previous works from the players all that you mentioned, whether that is going further in the World Cup or winning an AFCON again or winning an Olympics. So we do really feel that, but it's also nice to see that it's possible. And if I talk about our team now maybe in a more selfish way, and something that I hear a lot of the older players talk about when they talk about this team, is that there is such a wide spread of talent now, that maybe our generation would be very competitive with the teams that we talked about before, but it's just up to us now really to seal that and kind of make our own history. So we do feel strongly about that, and it's something that is talked about actually quite often whenever we have important meetings. It's something that is reminded, to the players why we are here, what we're trying to achieve, and what that actually looks like for our future. And I think my biggest regret would be if we can't fulfill some of those ambitions and dreams for this whole team. I'm not talking about me selfishly, but selflessly for all the players that I love to see. And I talk about, Ademola Lookman being the best player in Africa, or Victor Osimhen being the best striker in Africa. We almost owe it to each other that we actually seal that and make history in a certain way.
So how do you make expectation light? How do you make expectation not feel heavy on the shoulders? And I would also, after Will, I'd also love to hear your experience of this in a business context, Leon.
So for me and the team now, I think it's about spreading it. I feel I've seen it, for example, take it back to the most recent tournament, AFCON. Victor Osimhen was just crowned best player in Africa. He came off a season of winning the Scudetto with Napoli, which was historic. People were mentioning his name together with Maradona in the same sentence, and those kind of things for what he meant for that city. And we came to that tournament and the stage was set. Didier Drogba was there. Everyone was talking to Victor for him to really go all the way and almost crown those efforts as, the pride of Africa, And I really felt for him because I could see what that pressure did to him as a player, and I felt like it was something that almost needed to be released around him. And I feel like when we had moments like that, the only way I could really support him, and I felt the team could support him in that moment, was to say that we are there together to do it. And I feel like the moment he let that go, for me, his performance at that tournament was so powerful because he played in such a selfless way, and it wasn't about him trying to score or break Odi Nigala's record for most goals at AFCON. It was just about really helping the team, and that kind of made me put him in a different light. So I think, in these kind of moments, we kind of want to make that really, really clear that we can only give our best. And I think I owe it to my teammates to give them my best version. And I only know what that looks like. But I think that they would have seen glimmers of that in my good moments. And I expect the same from them. So we tried to strip it down back to basics. And the only place that we can really influence that is being on the pitch. And then we, going back to some of the standards we've touched on in previous episodes, about timekeeping and presenting yourself in a way that you are there to help the team. And then besides that, it's a sport and you have two teams that are trying to win. And it's not just only Nigeria that is a giant team in Africa now. So it's not easy. And I think, I think the only thing that will give you peace, and something that we also kind of use as a relief, is to just know I've given everything. And I've seen players here play through injury, shed blood, go through some kind of difficult, conditions to be there to play, to give everything for their country. So me personally, and looking at my team, we would look back at these kind of moments and know that we gave everything.
Yeah, I think in my world, like the word Will has used there, accountability. That's the big thing that I feel that I have to really grab hold and own. So we prepare as best possible. So let's say we've got an event that we have to deliver on Friday, and the person who is leading that, I asked them today, how are you? How are you feeling about it? How is there anything you're concerned or worried about? Because every decision that you make, like, you should be able to come to me and know that I'm going to support you with that. And if it's the wrong decision, we'll work that out together, and we'll kind of, like, whatever happens, if it goes wrong on the day, I'm accountable because I'm supposed to be supporting you through that journey. And that's kind of a key focus of mine. So support, preparation, and accountability are the three things that really kind of have been central to the successes that I've had, whether that's in delivering an event, whether that's in delivering a commercial deal, whether that's kind of delivering a high, like a big presentation where I've had to present to the chief executives of the FA, Premier League, EFL, and WSL. Like, that's all about preparation, being accountable, and then using the support around me to make sure that I'm in the best possible place to deliver. So, like, sticking to those principles has been like absolutely key. And I think on my journey, maybe, let me be honest. I absolutely, at different parts of my journey, have kind of just gone, this is my bit I'm responsible for. So you guys, is everything okay? Okay, cool. Because this is my bit. Whereas actually, as a leader, you can't do that. I don't believe you can do that. You're responsible for the whole pie, in my mind, in my world. I have to allow people to go away and do things, and they'll get things wrong, etc. But I've got to be the one who goes, we're doing this together. You're not standing alone. We're doing this together, and we will find the best possible way to do this. And you know what? If it does go wrong, it's not you, because we are collectively going to get this right together. So we celebrate together. And if it doesn't go so well, we review and we get it right the next time. But we go into this with confidence because we've done all the right things. And Maro, I was at Twickenham last week, and walking around that stadium, it's enormous. Like, it's huge, right? And I was just thinking a lot about you at that point. And you asked Will about the generations that had come before him. But walking around the corridors around Twickenham, like, it's everywhere. Like, the imagery from black and white to present day, there's so much there. And I just wonder, at what point does the pressure feel at its highest, I guess, if that's the right way to put it, around a big England game, for example? Is it when you're out there singing the anthem? Is it the day before? Is it the morning of? Is it a couple of days before? At what point is the pressure really ramped up? Because I don't know, as a punter, I've got no idea. I've played in front of maybe 5,000 people at absolute top, and I'm so proud of that. So to be playing in front of tens of thousands of people in that way, like, at what point is the pressure highest for you? Let's take England, for example. And when does it go? Because I always hear athletes talking about, I hear that whistle and it's gone. I'm then into it.
So before games, and this is definitely going to be something that I'm going to miss when I eventually retire. Before games, there's a weird feeling of anxiousness, nerves, maybe like pressure. Excitement is all like mixed up into this ball, and the feeling is quite uncomfortable. It's not something that I love, but it's something that when I'm not involved, I miss, and it doesn't quite make sense, but I really do miss that feeling when I'm not playing, and I guess. Different people feel pressure at different stages. Sometimes it's at the beginning of the week when they're announced in the team. They're like, "Oh my goodness, I'm in the starting team," or "I'm this, I'm that, I'm doing this role." Or sometimes it's when it's made public and maybe it's a controversial call, and some people are like, "Oh, I'm getting a lot of feedback online, or about, oh, people don't think I should be picked." Da da da, or it could be, just before we get to the game. And for me, that's when I feel nervous. That's when I probably, to answer the question, feel a bit of the pressure. But the moment that ball is kicked, everything, at that point, it doesn't matter if I'm playing at Bramley Road, the Park, Twickenham, or any of these other fantastic stadiums that I've been privileged enough to play. It doesn't matter, because it's just playing rugby, and you don't really have time to think. In the game, there are periods where it feels that you're under pressure, whether the opposition has the momentum, or you start doing the maths of the game and things are looking unlikely. Well, we had an example of that in this most recent Lions tour in the second test. At one point, we were 23-5 down with about 25 minutes of the game gone. In any normal test match in any normal circumstance, you've dug yourself a hole that's too deep to come out of. And there, if you allow the little gremlins in the mind to eat away and change the narratives and make you doubt yourself, then that the game is over. So yeah, but typically when you play, that's just you're just playing rugby at that point, and that's the best feeling.
Maro, there's something like really beautiful about what you've just said about dealing with pressure. The point you get the ball and you start playing, it goes. I mean, I think that's a brilliant way to end what's been another fascinating, insightful conversation, from dealing with pressure from the outside, from the nation, from the media, to how you deal with pressure internally in terms of within a camp when the pressure's really, really ramped up and on. This is Power and Purpose, a podcast on leadership in sport, business and beyond. Please go away, subscribe, share on social media, join our community, join our WhatsApp group. That's a big thing. Join our WhatsApp group. That's going to be popping off. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Take care.